Everything is about to change for the New York Rangers. After a very disappointing weekend, Chris Drury's next moves have become obvious, and multiple players are going to be shipped off at this year's trade deadline. And not only is this team going to look very different post-deadline, it's going to look extremely different heading into next season. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Rangers Digest. But before we do that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 68% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening with the New York Rangers, from trade rumors to trade reports to practice reports, all that fun stuff as we head towards the trade deadline and hopefully a playoff push. We'll see about that. It's free. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, to get into it, there are going to be multiple players moved at this year's trade deadline. I mean, this team is just not good enough. I've been very optimistic on this channel, but after this weekend, I'm not sure this team can continue to fool anyone. They are simply not good enough, and there's still a real world where they make the playoffs this season. There really is, and I've been saying that, if you do somehow make the playoffs, you got to call up the young guys. You got to move off of your UFAs at this year's trade deadline. It's just this team is not good enough. There's no reason to keep them. Get rid of them. They're all older anyway. We'll get into a few specific ones in this video, but move off of them. And maybe you should look at moving off of some players that aren't even UFAs to get a lot younger, because the direction of this team should be heading it should be heading in that direction, I should say. But a very disappointing weekend. Yes, they squeezed out the win yesterday, and they're only a few points back of a wild card spot right now, but that wasn't a very convincing win. I mean, some of the goals were very nice shots, for sure. JT Miller, even Jimmy Vesey's goal, nice shots, but, not a great game. And Pittsburgh's one of the worst teams in the league, and you just squeezed out a win against them, and you barely had any shots in the second period. So they escaped with a much-needed win against the Pittsburgh Penguins, but anyone who watched knows that they severely outplayed, or they were severely outplayed for most of that game. The big positive is that Igor Shesterkin played well in that game. It was a big bounce-back performance, but, it moved them within 2 points of the final wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference, but none of the blue shirts were pounding their chests after this one. This is a quote from Will Cooley, and I love Will Cooley. I have his jersey behind him. I think he's one of the best players on this team, and he gives it almost 100% every single night, and that's more than I can say for most of the guys that are making almost $10 million. So it's got to be better than that, Will Cooley said. That's not a good performance by us by any means. We know the standard is higher than that. So they know it in the room that they are not playing well. I mean, you must, because you're not playing well. And this is from Phil as well. This team is just not good. Bare minimum, every UFA is getting traded, and I assume he means at this year's trade deadline. So this is going to be within the next 2 weeks, and maybe more if you can swing deals at the deadline. If not, at the draft. Need significant turnover between now and next season, and I, at this point, agree. This team's got to get younger. It's just the fact of the matter. And a lot of the older guys and the guys that you're relying upon to score goals for you are not. And they're not even generating chances. It's not about scoring goals, putting up points. Not even generating chances. The only guys generating chances are guys like Will Cooley, JT Miller. It's been awful. And one of the worst quotes I've seen is from this as well. A lot of guys around the league that I know all told me that they love playing against Adam Fox in the playoffs. That's awful. That is awful. And I love Adam Fox, and I think he's one of the best defensemen in the league, offensively at least. He is a special player. He is, but that's a tough quote, that players love playing against you in the playoffs. So they got to get younger. They got to get meaner. And that starts at this year's trade deadline. Now, who are the Rangers going to trade at this year's trade deadline? We've been talking about Ryan Lindgren. I mean, it's a given. That guy, I love that guy. I think he's been a great player for the Rangers in his time here. You must trade Ryan Lindgren at this year's trade deadline. I'm just putting that out there. That's the last time I'll mention him this video, and maybe until he gets traded, but unless he does something crazy in a game. But anyway, two other guys that are on the block, per se, is Jones and Vesey, Zach Jones and Jimmy Vesey. And they've been fairly open about their openness to a change of scenery. And while Drury has made efforts to, make that happen, the market has yet to yield any competitive offers, according to one source. Smith as well, Riley Smith is another name, should garner more interest as a former Stanley Cup winner with a top 6 and special teams experience. The return may be limited to a mid-round pick or B-level prospect, but at least in this case, Berard or Othman could step in and immediately fill his shoes. Listen, I think if you add Berard and Othman to this lineup over Riley Smith, you're actually getting more of an impact anyway. So I would 100% move off of Riley Smith at this year's trade deadline anyway. He's a UFA at the end of the season. You got him to maybe go on another cup run. That is not going to happen. We know that. He has retained salary. Pittsburgh retained 25% of his salary, so it might be easier to move him in that way as well. So look at doing that, even if the Rangers have to retain salary, a bit of it. I mean, preferably not, but even if you have to get a better prospect or a better pick, I would do that. So I would definitely trade Riley Smith at this year's trade deadline as well. And in terms of Zach Jones, I like Zach Jones. Jimmy Vesey, trade Jimmy Vesey. I think you can get like a decent return for him, like a pick or something like that, right? So I would trade Jimmy Vesey. He's a UFA at the end of this year. He's going to be 32. I think it's time to get younger on the fourth line anyway. And you have a pretty good fourth line when healthy, and Adam Edstrom, Sam Carrick, and obviously Matt Rempe. So I would move off Jimmy Vesey. And again, to get back to Zach Jones, I believe in Zach Jones. For anyone who's been watching the channel for a long time, I really like Zach Jones. Maybe it is a time, or it is time for a change in scenery, because if you're not going to play on the team, you're not going to get better. And I'm a big believer in that the only way you're going to get better at the NHL level is by playing at the NHL level. So if the Rangers don't see him there, trade him, get rid of him, get an asset for him in return. Don't let him just sit down there in Hartford. It's not doing anything for your organization. Get some assets in return, so then you can use those assets, flip them, or draft, use a draft pick, what have you, at the draft. Or you could flip those assets and go get a guy who's actually going to make a difference and can play in the NHL. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I love Zach Jones. I think he should be given a shot. But if it is time, it's time, right? And, I mean, he's been playing well with Hartford as well. He had a really nice goal the other night. Not even a slap shot. This was like a snapshot from the blue line that went in top corner. And, I mean, Zach Jones, he's been playing pretty well with Hartford. Been a big supporter of his. But anyway, he's on a 2-year deal right now that expires at the end of this year. He is under control, so that would be, he's an RFA and under control after this in this summer. So that would be attractive to a lot of teams for a young defenseman like that, who's only 24 with a cap hit like that, to add in this season. And, for the future, I think this would be an investment for a couple teams, but I think this would be a very attractive deal for teams to take on because he's under control. You don't have to deal with him as a UFA after this season, so it would make sense for a lot of teams. When you take a look at Jimmy Vesey, same idea. Like I said, he's going to be a UFA, age 32. A lot of teams could use this guy on their fourth line just to fill out their lineup. Obviously, any contender going into the playoffs could use maybe Jimmy Vesey, and in case there's any injuries or anything like that. He only makes $800,000, and again, he is a UFA, so his contract expires at the end of this year. And looking at Riley Smith, Pittsburgh retains some of the salary in the initial trade, so should be fairly easy to move off this guy, even if you retain salary, to get a higher ranked prospect or a higher pick. I think you do it at this point. There's no way this guy should stay. And like I mentioned, I know I said that it was the last time I was going to mention him, but Ryan Lindgren, I think that you absolutely have to move off of Ryan Lindgren at this point. And not only Ryan Lindgren, maybe you take a look at some other guys who are not UFAs. Maybe you take a look at Mika Zibanejad at some point. I have his jersey on my wall as well. I love Mika Zibanejad. I think he's been a great player for the New York Rangers, but it could be time to move off of that player because he is getting older. The contract is starting to look pretty abysmal, and he's not putting up the points that he used to. He doesn't even look that engaged around the ice either, like in different situations. So maybe you start looking at that. It's going to be difficult, and I don't think it happens at this year's trade deadline, but I wonder if Zibanejad is even a Ranger come next season. I wouldn't be surprised if he's not, because we know Chris Drury, after what happened last offseason with Jacob Trouba, he can get ruthless. If he wants to make something happen, even with the JT Miller trade, for example, if he wants to make something happen, he is going to make something happen. And I'm not defending him in that way. That has been a problem, right? We've seen with some of the moves he's made, but could get very interesting here. But I think one thing's for sure, anyone who's a UFA, even Zach Jones at this point, should be moved at this year's trade deadline to make room for a guy like Brett Berard, for a guy like Brendan Othman to come in and gain some experience for the rest of the season. And one thing, we haven't even touched on really is Gabe Perreault could also make the jump to the NHL later this season. So, I would move off of all of the UFAs to make room for some of these guys to come in and try and make a difference late in the season. Maybe you do end up making a playoff push right there at the last minute. Some of these young guys get experience in the playoffs. That would be the best case scenario for me, to make the playoffs this year, but without all of these older guys, right? You move off your UFAs, you bring up the young guys from Hartford, Gabe Perreault from college as well, and you kind of see what they can do in the playoffs. Give them that experience moving forward, because they will be the difference makers in a couple of years, not the guys who are 32, 33 years old. So let me know what you think in the comments about moving off those guys. I think, the next move at this point for Chris Drury is obvious. I think it's just a matter of time. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything New York Rangers.